If you're using your own Bible tonight, turn with me to 2 Samuel chapter 10. Chapter 9 was all about David's kindness to Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan. And that was first and foremost for the sake of the covenants that David had made with Jonathan. But I think probably on top of that, it was just an outlet for the brotherly love that David had for Jonathan and yet could not show Jonathan because of his death. And, Mephibosheth was there, a son of Jonathan, just someone that he could pour those affections for Jonathan onto as a representative, being a son of Jonathan. I told you last week it was the tenderest chapter in the life of David. I stand by that. And if chapter 9 is the tenderest chapter in the life of David, chapter 10 is the bloodiest. In chapter 10, Israel is at war once again. And then for that matter, chapter 11 takes this further still, in that it is the Bathsheba chapter and one of David's lowest moments spiritually. So just listen to the lineup that we started in chapter 9. Chapter 9 is the tenderest chapter in the life of David. Chapter 10 is the bloodiest chapter in the life of David. And chapter 11, I guess we would say, is the naughtiest chapter in the life of David. I don't know how else to put that. So it's quite a lineup just right here near the middle of the book of 2 Samuel, chapter 9, chapter 10, chapter 11. And we are in chapter 10 tonight, the bloodiest chapter in the life of David. We read in verse 1, "After this, the king of the Ammonites died, and Hanun, his son, reigned in his place." Verse 2, "And David said, I will deal loyally with Hanun, the son of Nahash, as his father dealt loyally with me. So David sent by his servants to console him concerning his father, and David's servants came into the land of the Ammonites." This is one thing that nations always did with the changing of the guard. When the old king, the former king, passed away, or something happened that he was relinquished of duties, and the new king took over for him, one of the first things that the nations around that nation would do is test to make sure that any alliances that may have existed still did exist. And then, of course, it was an opportunity that if you didn't have an alliance with that kingdom or with that nation, well, this was a good chance to do it. You could find out where that new king stood on whether or not he would be an ally with you. Because oftentimes, yes, it was sons that were taking over as king for their fathers. Not always the case, but the majority of the time. But that does not necessarily mean that a son is going to be just like the father and desire the same allegiances that his father would. A case in point for that is Saul and Jonathan. Those two were nothing alike. Jonathan was nothing like his father Saul. So we keep a close eye on this sort of thing with the nation of Israel and the coming and going of our American presidents, don't we? With each new president, what's the first thing we want to know? Well, for me anyway, as a Bible student and a kind of a lover of prophecy, the first thing I want to know is, where does this president stand in relation to Israel? Is he going to be an ally with Israel, or is he going to be anti-Israel? The reason that's important is because we know that has end-time prophetic implications. So it's about testing those allegiances with the changing of the guard here. David wants to verify that the alliance that he had with Nahash, the father of Hanun, and the Ammonites was still firm. We don't know how that alliance came about. We do not have that biblical record of it. So no use guessing, but all we know is that it did exist. There was an alliance there. And for some time, apparently, Israel and the people of Ammon had peace and friendship between them. And here's David testing the water just to make sure that old alliance is holding up. He makes the first move on this by sending delegates that will carry his consolation for the passing of Hanun's father. And then also, it's not just consolation, it's not just an act of kindness, but really it's a diplomatic thing. He's trying to communicate the message and just let Hanun know, hey, I want to continue to honor the alliance that existed between me and your father. That's my move, and now it's your move. What say ye? Are we friends or are we enemies? And so we read in verse 3, but the princes, the other leaders and rulers there among the Ammonites, said to Hanun their lord, do you think because David has sent comforters to you that he is honoring your father? Don't you see what's really going on here? Has not David sent his servants to you to search the city and to spy it out and to overthrow it? So what have the leaders of Ammon done wrong here? Something pretty common we see quite a bit, not just as it concerns nation to nation, but just in life in general. What they did wrong here was that they judged David's intentions. Anyone have a problem with that? Judging another person's intentions? That is one of the most ignorant and pointless things that we can do. Why so? Because intentions are internal. You cannot know a person's attention by observing it visibly or by discerning it through hearing. So anytime you make a judgment on a person's intentions, you are completely guessing about stuff that's going on inside that person. You are guessing about what they think. You're guessing about what they feel. It's just all a bunch of guesswork. And it is an ignorant approach that usually yields ignorant results. Now, I say usually because it is not always the case. Sometimes we can actually judge the intentions of a person pretty accurately by paying close attention to their actions, especially when it's over a period of time. Let me give you an example of that. After the third time that David saw Saul with that wild, manic look in his eyes, and after the third time that Saul flung the spear to try to pin David to the wall, David reached a judgment. It was something like this: I think this guy doesn't like me very much. I get the sense that he wants me dead. Would you say that is a right-on judgment? I would say that is a right-on judgment. That is a righteous judgment, and yet that's a judgment of intentions by observing the externals of a person. If you really study what the Lord says about judging one another, there's actually a really easy way to define it. I think we make it way more complicated the majority of the time. We launch into Matthew 7 and, well, yes, Jesus said, judge not lest you be judged. And if you do judge, you're going to be judged to the same judgment that you judged that person. So just don't judge. But then Jesus also tells us that it is well within our right to judge a righteous judgment. And Jesus also teaches us that we can be looking at and inspecting the fruit to figure out what kind of tree it is that we're dealing with. What's that mean? That's talking about the external actions, the works of a person, whether they are righteous works or not. And that can be kind of confusing to people. But the really easy way to define that and sort of sort that out is just to simply say that here's the judgment that is allowed by Jesus. Here's what it looks like. Proper judgment allowed by Jesus. It is proper for us to judge the external actions of another individual. That is proper. We're allowed to do that. That's fruit. That's out in the open for the world to see. And Jesus gives us full authority to judge those external actions. He also gives us the full right and authority to judge the things that we can plainly see, but we are never to judge the things that we cannot plainly see. So we can judge the externals, but we can never judge the internals. We can judge the things that we can see in a person's life, and we cannot judge the things that we can't see. So no more of this, I bet they're thinking, no, stop that kind of stuff. That's ignorant, and it leads to ignorant results. No more of this, I know what they're thinking. I know what they're feeling. I just know why they did that. Did you ever do that? Someone does something and you're like, the action is completely neutral. This is where we're going in the study. The action is completely neutral, but you think to yourself, oh, I think I know the very negative motive that they had behind doing that. They were trying to make a statement, and I don't like the statement. All of that, no. But judging based on what we see in reality, that is completely fine. What are the observable actions of David so far? What has he done? What has he shown forth in the world for Hanun to see? Comfort and kindness. That's it. That's what he's shown forth. But what is the judgment? I just know David is angling to take us down. And I'm not going to let it happen. I know what he's thinking. I know what he's feeling. I know why he's doing this. And I'm going to take him down. And this error in judgment in this chapter is going to bring 5 kingdoms to war. And it is going to cost tens. I'll give you the number when we get to the end. It's going to cost tens of thousands and tens of thousands of non-Jewish lives. So it is a very steep price to pay for a simple error in judgment. The lesson we should learn here is if I stick to righteous judgment, that is, judging what is visible, not what is hidden, then I will save myself and probably a bunch of other people from unnecessary harm. But if I start assuming the motives of people, if I start assuming that I know what's going on within them, if I start reading minds instead of reading actions, then I will create conflict where none would have existed. And I will break relationships that could have been stable. And I'll probably drag others into battles that never needed to happen in the first place. And that's chapter 10 in a nutshell. Verse 4. So Hanun, by the way, I was thinking, David is going to battle with Hanun. I was thinking about titling this message, Showdown with Hanun at High Noon, and making like a Western background. I was this close, but I decided against it. So Hanun took David's servants and shaved off half the beard of each. Okay, Hanun believed his ignorant counselors, and he believed them so much that he put action to the judgments that they made about David. And he is sending now a very loud and clear statement of intent to David. He's definitely communicating something now with his actions. This was not just a beard trim that he gave to the delegates of David. When it says half the beard, that doesn't mean, well, they were really long and they took them down about halfway. This is not a beard trim, okay? The word shaved in the Hebrew there, I was not sure I was going to put that up. Okay, I guess it's up. Okay, that is what the word shaved means. It means down to the skin. And wouldn't it be embarrassing if as a man you had half of your beard shaved off? I mean, it's tough to even imagine what that would look like, right? So that what you're seeing there, as frightening and embarrassing as that is, that's what Hanun has done to the delegates of David. Okay, definitely you can take that down now. Thank you. It's going to be on a Christmas sweater. You're right. It's probably going to happen. Please, no one tell Lynn about that photo. I asked AI, what would I look like if half of my beard was shaved? And that was the picture it gave me. I didn't really do that ever, but that was the picture that it gave me. So to the typical American, this would be like, the extent of it would be cosmetic. Oh, that looks terrible. You saw that. That looks terrible. I feel so embarrassed for that person, half a beard. But the American way to look at it would be a pretty shallow way of looking at it, not just through, how do I want to say it? It should not be thought of as mere complexion and, I can't think of what I want to say here. Cosmetic, yeah. It should not be thought of as just mere merely cosmetic. This was not just cosmetic. This was cultural. This was a very important cultural thing for the Jews. For a Jewish man, it was very important that you have a beard, all right? For multiple reasons. Number one, only men could grow beards. Okay, only men can grow beards, okay? Let me strengthen the statement. Only men can grow beards. So having a beard, that is a gender distinction. And that is something that these Jews at this time period in history were okay with. They liked that. They wanted that. They wanted gender distinction. The man didn't want to be confused for a woman. So he wanted that gender distinction. That should be the case for every era of history. But as you know, we have some men today that are a little bit confused on the issue. But the point of it first is that a beard was a symbol of manliness or masculinity. And that's important to true men. I mean, that really matters to us. And then only mature men, or older young men were able to grow beards, and still are, as the case may be. It takes some age to actually grow a full beard. You've seen like teenagers, 13 years old, 14 years old, young boys, and they're trying to grow beards. It's kind of patchy. There's little hair sticking out. It's not full. And when that beard gets full, that's a sign of what? Maturity. So, number one, masculinity. Number two, maturity. And then last of all, it was in the law of Moses in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 27, that Jewish men were not to shape or trim the edges of their beards at all. So having a full natural beard was what? It was a sign of obedience to God. So you have these three really important symbols behind the beard: masculinity, maturity, and obedience to God. That's what Hanun was attacking here. Not just their appearance, but their masculinity, their maturity, and their obedience to God. But it gets even worse. And if you know this story, you're sweating. It gets much worse. Reading on in verse 4. And he cut off their garments in the middle, at their hips, and sent them away. So these men of Israel, they would have been wearing one-piece garments that came down to about the knees. These were robes. That's what they wore. If they had undergarments on, they were essentially the same thing. They would come all the way from the top, one piece, and then all the way down to near the knees. So if you take and cut off the garments in the middle, at the hips, what are you doing? You're exposing their entire bottom half. So, groin and buttocks. The legs, the feet, who cares? But groin and buttocks, those are exposed right now. The clothes end right here. Obviously, I don't need to tell you that this is a great embarrassment for them to be exposed like this. This is that reoccurring dream that we all have, where we're in church and we look down and suddenly, why are we not wearing any clothes? I'm not the only one that's had this dream, right? And then the rest of the dream is sweated panic, trying to figure out how to get out of church and not be seen, and then drive home and get into the house so that your spouse or your family doesn't see you, and hurry and get some clothes on. I'm not the only one, right? Surely you've had dreams like that before. Judy, you're making me feel bad here. What do we think of in a situation like that if it's a proper and decent society? That is embarrassing and humiliating. And that is what they are experiencing. Indecent exposure is humiliating to a decent and proper society. The Jews obviously were a decent and proper society, and they were a spiritual nation. So this was not funny. Hanun was not being funny. Like, this wasn't lighthearted, like a practical joke. He wasn't pulling a practical joke here or being an impractical joker. Hanun's message was meant to escalate tensions between Israel and Ammon. His message was to humiliate David's representatives, to dishonor David himself, to break the alliance. That would be like the formal and obvious way to do it. If you think we're still friends after this, you're pretty thick. No, this is a very definite breaking up of the alliance. And, of course, this was to force a confrontation with David and Israel. I don't know why anyone in their right mind would do that. But then again, I think we just answered the question. This guy's not in his right mind. Verse 5. When it was told David, he sent to meet them, for the men were greatly ashamed. They didn't even want to return back home. And so they get a messenger to David. Probably what they did is came to the nearest town, hid in the bushes, waited to see the first guy they could see and holler out to him and say, "Hey, buddy, don't come back here. But we need to get a message to David. I know it's going to sound like we're joking, but we're serious. This is the bare naked truth. Just believe us. Take the story to David. Tell David we need help. We'll be here in the bushes." I think it went down probably something like that. And David, being gracious, being merciful, he is, well, watch this. And the king said, "Remain at Jericho until your beards have grown, and then return." So David has graciously released them temporarily from their military duties, or I should say from their representative duties. They no longer have to carry messages until they get this issue resolved. It's a good play, right? Good move. Thank you, David. Appreciate that. Now, he mentions the beard growing back, but I assure you the beard was the less important thing there. And no doubt David would have had clothing, full clothing that covered everything, sent to these men. And then, so they don't have to return home and even be shamed by the half a beard thing, like I did to myself here tonight, David just says, stay there. Just stay there. Come back when your beards are fully grown once again. Verse 6, when the Ammonites saw that they had become a stench to David, that means that they really stunk the situation up, and they knew they did. And now there's nothing they can do. They're committed to this, so that however it falls out, it doesn't matter. They're going all in at this point. They realize they struck a nerve with David, and there's no going back. So we read, the Ammonites sent and hired the Syrians of Beth Rehob and the Syrians of Zobah, 20,000 foot soldiers, and the king of Maacah with 1,000 men, and the men of Tob, 12,000 men. I want you to notice, if you will, the word hired. It means exactly what it says there. That's a good translation, hired. Ammon hired all of these soldiers. And if you look over to the parallel count in 1 Chronicles chapter 19, verse 6, it tells us that Hanun actually paid the Syrians 1,000 talents of silver to do this. That's about $30 million in modern money. So these are mercenaries. These are soldiers that are getting paid to fight for Ammon against the people of Israel. Just remember all of that. Okay, we're going to come back to it, and it's going to be important in just a bit. Beth Rehob and Zobah, those are Syrians. But Maacah and Tob are not. So you have the two Syrians, and then you have the two Syrians, and then you have Maacah and Tob. So you have actually 4 different kingdoms that are lining up here in an alliance to fight against David and the nation of Israel. You have the Ammonites, you have the Syrians, and then you have Maacah and Tob. We don't know how many Ammonite soldiers there were because we're not told, but for the rest of these 3, Syria, Maacah, and Tob, their total soldier count is 33,000. Any thoughts about that? Good number, bad number, high number, low number? What do you think? Low. How many soldiers do you think the nation of Israel have at this point? I heard an answer. What was it? That is spot on. Someone did their homework. If you take a look at the last time the nation of Israel was numbered, that would be 1 Samuel chapter 15. And at that time, we were told they had 210,000 soldiers. But they're going to be numbered again in 2 Samuel chapter 24. That's the numbering that's going to anger the Lord and have David in hot water with the Lord. But nonetheless, in that 2 Samuel chapter 24 numbering, they are numbered at 1.3 million soldiers. We're talking soldiers here, not civilians. So, decades prior, 210,000 soldiers. In 2 Samuel chapter 24, 1.3 million soldiers. And the reason I say that 1 million is a really good guess is because they're probably not at the 1.3 million yet, but they're probably nearing it. Because we've read the stories of David's conquest and how he has gone through his enemies, conquered them, and then what? Then took their soldiers and made them servant soldiers. He's using the soldiers that he overcomes. He's going to continue to do that, but I would say at about 2 Samuel chapter 10, you're on the closer side to the 1.3 million. So what I'm saying is that this is not a fair fight by any stretch of the imagination. We're always used to Israel being the underdog and the enemies of Israel being the Goliath, and it's not the case anymore. You've read it with me. You've studied it with me. The enemies of Israel don't want to mess with them anymore. Here's why. They're growing. The kingdom is expanding. Their military is getting so huge. But there is one fool in all of this, Hanun, who decides to take on an army with probably around 1 million soldiers. And I don't know what he's got. Probably maybe around 70,000. I'm just guessing, wild guess. But his alliance has only got 33,000. That's just not going to do it. Israel's got the overwhelming numbers. Oh, they have something else very important too. God. They have God. The nation of Israel has the Lord. So this is going to be a disaster for the enemies of Israel. And this entire scenario that we're looking at tonight, this is what Christian squabbles look like. I've seen this kind of stuff happen a lot among believers where a believer tries to judge the intentions of another believer. And they make a stink of the situation, just like Hanun did here with David. And then they start to gather allies. They start to get some brothers and sisters around them that will agree with with them. Don't you agree about that person, that believer? I know they say they're a Christian, but this is what they said and this is what they did. And so you end up roping in all of these other allies. You get other believers to take your side. And now you have a church family going to war with one another there in a local church. You have brother and sister versus brother and sister. It's division right out of the gate, so it's not good. But that kind of division, if it's not resolved peacefully, it can end up in a church split or the disbandment of a church altogether. These are very destructive things that happen among Christians. I know it's not restricted to Christians. I mean, it happens in families, it happens in schools, it happens on the workplace. But those aren't my primary concerns. As a Bible teacher, my primary concern is the church. And I do see this kind of thing. A bad judgment, the taking of sides, and a mess that is made in a situation. Don't let anyone rope you into that kind of stuff. It's just disastrous. The better approach is to humble yourself. Confess your wrongdoing, seek forgiveness. Don't gather a crowd. If you're on the part of the crowd that's being recruited, don't become a part of their crowd, but go to that person, deal with that situation one-on-one as Jesus taught us to. Don't escalate the situation, but reconcile the situation. That should always be the approach that we take. Our approach should always be to seek to restore that person to the church and to you in the spirit of meekness. So humility will heal what pride will destroy. Choose very carefully the approach that you take in situations like that. Choose wisely between humility and pride. Verse 7. And when David heard of it, he sent Joab, that is David's nephew, and the general of David's army here. We've talked about it before. He is not a good guy. He's not. In fact, he should right now have already been executed for war crimes. But David doesn't do that. I've shared this with you, that David puts that responsibility of having Joab finally executed on his poor son, Solomon. He has Solomon do that kind of first thing as Solomon takes over the reign of the kingdom. But for now, Joab is David's general, and if nothing else, he at least knows Joab will do the dirty work. I mean, whatever you want Joab to do, he will do. He will kill whoever you need him to kill. He's just that kind of person. I think he came out of the womb like that, just ready to kill. And so David is going to use him to great effect. And he is actually a very brilliant general. You'll see that just in this chapter alone. Reading on. He sent Joab and all the host of the mighty men. So David is doing what he has to do at this point. He did not want to get drug into this situation. But Hanun has amassed forces against him. Apparently David knows that. And so David now has to prepare a defense. And his defense is that he's going to go on the offensive. Sometimes the best defense is a good offense. I know that's not the saying. It's the other way around. But that's the way it is in battle sometimes. Sometimes the best defense is a good offense, because if you're going on the offensive, you get to choose the battleground. You get to lay the first strategy. You get to make the first strike. And that's what David is going to do twice, actually, in this chapter. Verse 8. And the Ammonites came out and drew up in battle array at the entrance of the gate, and the Syrians of Zobah and Rehob and the men of Tob and Maacah were by themselves in the open country. Okay, so Joab took this fight right to the front gate of the Ammonites, and the Ammonites come out to fight. It sounds like they've come outside the gate and outside the city walls. I can't say that for certain. They may be just inside the city walls, but either way, they're right there by their own city walls. So there is a close defense for them if they need to retreat. If they're not out, if they're not already behind there, if they need to retreat and get behind their wall, they can do that. They're in a good position. The hired guns, the Syrians, Maacah, Tob, those guys are mobile. They're not with the Ammonites. They're out somewhere in the open pasture, hiding out, moving around. And the nation of Israel, Joab, they don't know where these folks are as of verse 8. They don't find that out until verse 9. They've come up now to the gate of this Ammonite city, and they're ready to fight the Ammonites. They have no idea where these other groups, where these other folks are, the Syrians, Maacah, and Tob. Now watch this, verse 9. When Joab saw that the battle was set against him, both in front and in the rear, he chose some of the best men of Israel and arrayed them against the Syrians. Verse 10, the rest of his men he put in the charge of Abishai, his brother, also David's nephew, by the way, and he arrayed them against the Ammonites. Okay, here's what's happening in verses 9 and 10. The enemies of Israel, though outnumbered, they've actually come up with a very good strategy. I mean, this is a very good plan of battle. They have Israel surrounded. The way they did this was draw Israel up to their front door, and then have the Syrians and Maacah and Tob have those soldiers ready to swing and close the door behind them, come up behind them, and then trap the people of Israel, the soldiers of Israel, between the city and between the soldiers that have just closed them in. That's what they do. Israel is now trapped between those two army groups, those two, we'll call them fronts. So, two fronts now that they are facing. And what that does is that immediately and effectively divides Israel's forces. You can't just keep fighting forward and try to take care of the Ammonites first. You're going to get picked off from the back. You have to divide your army right away. You have to turn some of your guys around to protect the backside of your army while the majority of your soldiers take on the larger numbers of the Ammonites in front of you. Now, Joab has committed a smaller number of soldiers and yet a more elite force of soldiers to take on these forces around the rear. So it's less numbers to take on these forces, but elite soldiers. And I'm going to show you why that is in just a while. But first of all, he takes the bulk of his soldiers to face the bulk of the Ammonites. So numbers upon numbers. This is making sense. But I think there's even more to it than that. It is, no matter how you look at it, from both sides, great strategy. Great strategy from both sides here. You know, sometimes in war, someone's playing chess and the other one's playing checkers. These are two people expertly playing chess. These are two people, two commanders in chief. 4 kingdoms, 5 when you count Israel, 5 kingdoms just playing expert warfare here in their strategies. And in spiritual warfare, we need to kind of understand this same thing, that the enemy that we face, he is not playing checkers while we play chess. He does not just willy-nilly throw his plans together, get a wild hair and say, oh, well, I think I'll go attack Dawn today. I don't really have much in mind. I'll just get there, see what happens, see what I can bother her with. That's not what he does. He is so patient and so crafty, and dare I say, such a brilliant, is strategician a word? He is brilliant at strategy because he knows us so well. And when he puts a plan together, it is going to be a good one. And he's probably going to come at you from multiple fronts. Have you noticed that in spiritual warfare? How often is it just like one thing that you're taking on? No, you take on the one thing, and once you're engaged with that, now you're getting hit from behind and from the left and from the right, and those attacks come from all over the place. So we must learn what Paul taught us about our enemy in 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 11, that we would not be outwitted by Satan, and that we would not be ignorant of his devices or designs. We have to know how our enemy sets up his strategies for us. And it shouldn't be like impossible for us, because this stuff's happening over and over again. What are the things that are tripping you up constantly? What are the battles that you're losing constantly? Okay, think about the strategy that he's using against you. Figure out why it's so successful. Ask for the Lord's help. Start to put some strategy together all your own. If you don't take him seriously, he's going to end up doing this to you. He's going to trap you. He's going to pin you down. He's going to lock you in. He's going to outsmart you. And he's going to make you sorry that you didn't take it more seriously and put in the work to stay a step ahead of your enemy. Verse 11, and he said, if the Syrians are too strong for me, then you shall help me. But if the Ammonites are too strong for you, then I will come and help you. So that shows fluidity. That shows flexibility in the battle plan. He's got the two forces divvied out the way that he thinks they're going to be successful. But if it doesn't work, he's keeping his options open. He's ready to, on the fly, adjust those numbers, send more soldiers to the back if needed, or more soldiers to the front to fight the Ammonites if needed. Whatever they need, just go with it, make the changes, and then get the job done. Now, in verse 12, Joab is going to give them a very inspiring rally cry. I didn't really even think this guy had something like this in him. Not surprisingly, the rallying cry is going to show great loyalty to the Jews, but surprisingly, it's going to show great loyalty to God and even what appears to be spirituality. He's committing this entire battle to the Lord. Normally, this guy was a lot like Saul, not a spiritual bone in his body, but we're just going to let him have this moment to shine and give us this beautiful rally cry. He says this, "Be of good courage, and let us be courageous for our people and for the cities of our God. And may the Lord do what seems good to him." Okay, great rally cry. I think we can just very easily translate that right to us and make it applicable. I think it converts quite easily. First off, be of good courage. That is not a command on how they should feel. He's not telling them to feel courageous. It is a command on an action. I know we often think that courage is an emotion of some sort. It's a feeling of some sort. It's not being afraid in the face of whatever danger, risk, challenge. But that's not what courage is. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is a choice that we make regardless of emotions. So it is making the choice to do something daring or challenging or risky, even though there's fear and there's doubt and worry and concern and any other negative emotion that might surround that situation. It is dedication to action no matter what. Dedication to action no matter what. Translates perfectly to us in spiritual life, doesn't it? Next we have, let us be courageous for our people. And I will equate that to our local church. He's talking about Jewish brothers and sisters there. He's talking about families and tribes. I'm going to take that and relate that to the church. That let's be courageous in whatever battles that we're facing for the sake of the local church. How does that make sense? Well, what kind of local church do you want to show up to? Do you want to show up to a down in the dumps church or a victorious church? You want to show up to the mascot of your church is Eeyore? Is that the kind of church you want to be attending? Oh well, nothing good ever happens, but we show up. Or do you want to show up and be a part of a victorious church? And if your answer is I want to be a part of a victorious church, then that means our individual members are going to have to be winning their own individual spiritual battles. Now, if it's a collective battle, awesome, we'll fight that together with you. But it means that as we face those individual spiritual battles in life, we have to be winning them. And then we come together as a victorious local church. And then last we have the statement, let us be courageous for the cities of our God. And that is a focus on Israel in the broader context. That's referring to building structures and land. So I'm going to relate that to the kingdom of God, or the church globally, if you will. So we need to be courageous in our spiritual warfare for the sake of the Lord's church worldwide, for the sake of the church that he gave everything for and died for in order to build and grow outward, expand, not just build up each individual church, but to expand outward. And then finally, may the Lord do what seems good to him. I think this is the best part of the rally cry, because it's committing to fight with everything they've got, and yet it's leaving the outcome to the Lord. It's that perfect balance between human responsibility and divine sovereignty. Don't ever be confused about believing in divine sovereignty as if it's a pacifist thing. It's not. When you believe God's in control of everything, that doesn't mean, well, I'm not going to do anything because God's just going to do whatever he wants anyway. All I'll do is get in the way. Believing firmly in the sovereignty of God is not being passive. It is understanding that there are two sides to that relationship. Yes, he is sovereign. He's going to do what he wills. Nothing can stop him when he determines to do what he wills to do. But there's two sides to that relationship, and we have a side to that relationship. And our side would be cooperation or action, if you prefer that word. It's action and then trusting in his sovereignty. It's basically working as hard as we can, as smart as we can, and then trusting him with the outcome. Or in the case of spiritual warfare, it's fighting with everything we got. It's putting all of our guts into our battles and then trusting him with the outcome. Verse 13. So Joab and the people who were with him drew near to battle against the Syrians, and they fled before him. Verse 14. And when the Ammonites saw that the Syrians fled, they likewise fled before Abishai and entered the city. So this is exactly how Joab drew this up. That if we can just get the hired guns first, the mercenaries, if we can freak them out and turn them away, then that's going to do the same thing to the Ammonites. Because Hanun, he was not confident enough to take us on by himself. He went out and paid good money. $30 million. He went out and paid good money to hire soldiers to give him the confidence to even show his face in this battle. So if we take the smaller group out first, the hirelings, then Ammon will also tuck tail and run. And just think about it. Who would be the most likely in this scenario to tuck tail and run? The Ammonites, who have a motivation. This is their war. Or the hirelings, who really have no involvement in this other than they were hired to get involved. But really, their only motivation in this is our payday. If we do this, we're getting a payday. I mean, the hireling is always going to be the first to flee in a situation that gets dangerous, right? Jesus taught us that from John chapter 10, verses 12 and 13. He said, he who is a hired hand, or a hireling, if you're reading in the King James Version, and not a shepherd who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees. Why? Because he was a hired hand, and he cares nothing for the sheep. You know how this is. When you're fighting for your family, when you're fighting for your friends, when you're fighting for your church, when you're fighting for the sheep, you're invested there. There's a motivation that's going to keep you in that fight until the last drop of blood and the last breath. But if it's just about a payday, if it's just about maybe spoils of war, some kind of material gain, well, when the time comes where there's a decision that has to be made between preserving my own life or the material gain, we're going to choose our own life every single time, because what good is the material gain if we lose our own life? What good is the payday if we're dead and buried before the payday comes? So yeah, brilliant plan. Take out the hirelings first, then this whole thing's going to fold like dominoes. Well, I guess dominoes don't fold, but you know what I mean. Sometimes I mix my metaphor. I was trained by Paul, the apostle. So Joab's plan worked to perfection. Reading on in verse 14. Then Joab returned from fighting against the Ammonites and came to Jerusalem, 15. And when the Syrians saw that they had been defeated by Israel, they gathered themselves together. Verse 16, and Hadad-Etzer sent and brought out the Syrians who were beyond the Euphrates. They came to Halam with Shobach, the commander of the army of Hadad-Etzer, at their head. All right, so this is talking about the Syrians now. Check this out. The Ammonites have learned their lesson. They instigated, they attacked Israel. They were beaten decisively. They found out, and they're done. They are home licking their wounds and vowing, never again. We will never mess with that group again. We're done. They learned their lesson, but the Syrians did not. This is so weird. They shouldn't even be involved. They were paid to be involved. They got whooped, but now I think their pride is hurt and they want paybacks. So they have called up all their troops now. Just a portion of their troops were paid for the mercenary services. Now it's personal. Now it's Syria versus Israel, and so they call up all their troops. They think all their troops are going to be enough, and it will not. But again, this kind of thing is pretty common. A believer who has no business sticking his nose in another person's business, and they end up involving themselves, they pick a side, and then they get their feelings hurt at some point in that exchange, and now it's personal. And now it's not that person, it's not me joining in that person versus that person. Now it's me versus that person. They're going to pay for what they said. They're going to pay for what they did. I'm going to get revenge in this situation. And so something you shouldn't even be involved in. Now it's personal. Now there's probably bitter feelings involved. Now there's probably the dissolution of that relationship if there's not at some point better courses of action taken and restoration taking place. So Matthew chapter 7, verse 12. This is really the answer to these kind of issues. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Matthew chapter 7, verse 12, the silver rule. It's usually called the golden rule, but the golden rule is actually love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. The second one is likened to it. This is the silver rule. Do unto others as you would have them do to you. Love your neighbor as yourself, right? Do you want people sticking their noses in your business? No. Do you want other people joining your friends and ganging up on you? No, I don't think you do. So then don't do that to other people. Just keep yourself out of that altogether. Very simple, but all too often the road not taken, unfortunately. Verse 17, and we're done here with a quick finish. And when it was told David, he gathered all Israel together and crossed the Jordan and came to Halam. The Syrians arrayed themselves against David and fought with him. What's different this time? It's not Joab leading this battle. It's David. David wasn't in the last one, but this battle appears to be a more challenging battle for Israel, and so David is a full participant here. Joab's not the commander-in-chief right now. David is. And one thing we're noticing about David is that if he knew that you were going to war with him, he'd just beat you to it. I shared earlier, his defense was to go on the offensive. That way, as I said, he gets to choose the battlefield. He gets to set the strategy, at least out of the gate. He gets to make the first attack. I mean, it's a brilliant strategy. It is in fighting as well. I won't go into the details on this, but I used to get into a lot of fights in high school and grade school, junior high school. And my strategy was always, if I know someone is going to fight me, if I know it's inevitable, as soon as I see them make the first aggressive move toward me, I strike first like lightning. And that was my strategy. Happened many times. I got into many fights. You guys don't even know the numbers. Sorry. I got into many fights. Never had a scratch on me, and that was because I landed that first punch first all the time. And that was usually the end of it. So I am not bragging about that. I'm not proud of that. I am a different man now. My temper has been sanctified by the Lord, and I'm not recommending fighting. But if you are going to be in a fight and you know you're going to be in a fight, that is a great strategy. Even a bully twice your size loses some of his guts when you break his nose first, right? So just keep that in mind. I'm not as concerned that you know how to fight physically. This is an even better principle for spiritual matters. If you know your enemy's coming after you, beat him to the punch. Get your sword, get out there, and start hacking away. Start breaking the defenses of the enemy. You become the offensive person in that situation. Verse 19. Oh, we didn't cover verse 18. We're well over already. You can look at 1 Chronicles chapter 19, verse 18 to figure out the numbers on this, but this ends up being 47,001 soldiers of the Syrians that are killed. We are not given the foot soldiers. We are only given the cavalry, those on horses, and the chariots. There are 700 chariots. But if you go to First Chronicles chapter 19, verse 18, it tells you the number of men from those chariots. So verse 18 has given us a chariot account here, a chariot count in 2 Samuel. In 1 Chronicles, it's giving us a charioteer count. And it tells us that of those 700 chariots where all the men died, 7,000 of them died. That means there were 10 men in each chariot. It was completely normal. A total of 47,001 soldiers were killed that day. This does not include the first battle that Joab fought. This is only David's battle with the Syrians. It does not include the foot soldiers that would have died. But even without the casualty count of the foot soldiers, this is the bloodiest day. These are the most soldiers, most enemies killed by David in the history of the nation. And not just under David's reign, but for all of Israel. There was never a day where more enemies were killed than this day. There was never a day where more enemies were killed and more territory won for the people of the Lord and the Lord. Verse 19, and when all the kings who were servants of Hadad-Etzer saw that they had been defeated by Israel, they made peace with Israel and became subject to them. They started this day as free men and women. They decided to improperly judge David's intentions, and by the end of the day, they are slaves of Israel, all because they had to act like morons, basically. So spiritual lesson number umpteen, don't act like a moron, and you'll be okay. Reading on in verse 19 and closing. So the Syrians were afraid to save the Ammonites anymore. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, we're done with that. Don't even knock. Don't even offer money. The amount doesn't matter. The Ammonites, they learned after mixing it up with Joab, but the Syrians learned after mixing it up with David. All right, let's stand and let's close in prayer.